Hey, welcome to the Iron Age Archive. I'm Bucklander. Jeff should be here somewhere.
Now your mic is too loud. Sorry. I told you to keep bumping it up.
There.
And then...
How's that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Perfect timing because the Guile theme goes with everything. Guile theme goes with everything. So I'm glad that it could organically end just as we're beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. The one before that was Blanca, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yep. And, I think it...
Somehow tie that into Tragedy and Hope.
Well, Jeff, when you think about it, the technocracy's like M. Bison. And we're taking him on. So...
Yeah. From what I understand, M. Bison ends up creating a clone army, right? Cammy is actually a clone of M. Bison, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know the lore. I just remember sitting on my neighbor's floor playing Street Fighter 2 for hours and hours and hours. And so that's all I remember. That's the attachment. Anyway, here we are. Oh, I did Renegade said to restart my computer beforehand. I did that, but it still looks like there's a little bit of lag. Has it changed? No, it has not changed. Alright. Again, bad radio or TV, but I'm gonna do this.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Jeff, you got a lot of background noise. All right, it looks like we're good. Renegade, can you give me a thumbs up that you see the things changing, or just say?
I can see it. It's not changing.
It hasn't changed.
No.
It's changing in OBS for me, but there. Okay, there's a little bit of... Okay, there's some lag. Let's do that again. I did try to prevent this from happening. But it hasn't really worked. I haven't been able to prevent...
So we got the black screen right now.
Yep. I'm just restarting it in All right, you've got I don't know what's going on. I did freaking...
It's fine.
Is it? Okay, there's just like a 30-second delay then, Because I'm watching. Okay, cool. You can see that, can you, Jeff?
Yeah.
All right,
And
great.
by the way, it's going to be slower if you're watching it on the YouTube channel because there's a delay between our broadcast and the YouTube as well.
Yeah. I understand. But I still couldn't see anything. All right. So, yeah, Treasure and Hope, episode 5. We're going to be pulling in, we're going to be returning to some of those things I said in the second or third episode about capitalism. Like, we're going to come back to that. The emergence of monopoly capitalism is a theme that runs throughout, and monopoly capitalism steps into what Quigley calls the mixed economy, which you might want to call the managerial economy. But so today we're kind of looking at how financial capitalism merges into monopoly capitalism to an extent, the failures of the financial and economic system in this time period, and then that will be built off of when we really think about the emergence of managerialism, the managerial economy. So a little bit longer version of the recap. I wanna revisit some ideas that we've built so far. The first is this idea that I talked about last time, which is the longue durée. Now, Quigley is not part of the longue durée school. It's also known as the Annales school. He's part of some American equivalent. The longue durée school is a school of history developed in France, and it takes the view that there's this like underlying rhythm to history, and politics and great men and wars are something happening on a much more surface level, and what's really moving things is this a deep current, right? You can think of it like the ocean, and you get waves from both the shallow and the deeper currents, by themselves, but you get really big events when the shallow lines up with a swell from the deep current, and that's when you really get something like Alexander the Great. The longue durée would say something like Greece was going to conquer Persia anyway, but Alexander the Great kind of was just a particularly good general who sped up the process. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at that today.
Renegade has a question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Renegade has a question. Is Quigley only concerned with economics, or does he talk about changes in morality, etc., culture, morality, that kind of thing?
Yeah, he does, but it's not that he's so focused on economics. What he thinks is that the economic system is the system driving Western civilization. There are other civilizations who are motivated in other ways. One of the things Quigley says, he doesn't really talk about morality, but he says actually what Western civilization needs is a revitalization of its spirituality, and that that's where we're lagging. So that's sort of what he thinks we should really be focusing on. But morality and all that stuff is downstream from these bigger things. They're caused by deeper things, and morality is sort of like how a group sort of manages itself. He's not like a total relativist, but these distinctive elements of morality are what sort of the difference in morality between us and say Arab culture. I mean, those are mainly details, because underlying there's still some sort of fundamental universal agreement on morality between us and them. But you have to remember, Quigley's writing in 1963. 1968 hasn't happened yet. 1968 is the turning point where the baby boomers, the oldest baby boomers, are at the end of their time at university. You don't have to. There's a problem, right, where you look at university lectures, and you go, "Oh man, they've all gone downhill so much in the last 20, 30, 40 years." Well, that's true in a lot of ways, but in many ways, they're not really worse than they used to be. They have been, university departments of history were Marxist for a very long time before 1968. And these Marxists, Adorno, not Adenauer. Adenauer is the West German chancellor, post-war German chancellor. Adorno is the leading light of the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School comes over in the 30s and 40s, and a lot of them are there teaching, having spread their poison, because it's poison, to the American and British systems, and the baby boomers are there to pick up on the Frankfurt School's ideas. So the ideas, it's not remarkably better some bit behind before some magical date. And there's always been weird guys in universities, eccentrics. So morality has not, that post-1968 morality is not yet a thing for Quigley. Quigley's still living in this sort of bubble. It hasn't burst yet.
Do you think you could also look at it in the context of war, where economics and industrialization were kind of they happened at the same time? They were kind of a military technology, right? So right now we're living in an age of more ideological warfare. Therefore, culture stuff and this morality stuff is more at the forefront than economics. Where at that time, war was more about economics and industrialization.
To an extent, yeah. I don't think that it's still very much about economics. It's just morphed. It's not about producing B-29 super fortresses. We can do that if we need to, but it is about balanced trade stuff. There's still these sort of trade conflicts. Trade conflicts have always been there, and I would say that trade conflicts are more of a product of longue durée. They point more towards longue durée thought than military conflicts. The extent to which things have changed, I don't think Quigley would say things have changed that much. There's a surface that has changed, but there's still these processes that have been going on for a very long time that are not going anywhere, and they haven't changed that much, right? There's that Who song, right? Won't Get Fooled Again, which is about a revolution, and the very last lines of it are meet the new boss same as the old boss. So one of the things there's this tension, right, between change, lots of things is always changing, but actually nothing's new at a deep and fundamental level. I don't think we're really living. There's no new motive in the world. The motives that we're dealing with have always been there. It's just the ability to implement those motives has slowly been gaining. And Heidegger talks about this in the question concerning technology, that if you really, probably the most definitive moment, turning point, is not really anything new, but an increased precision in science, which allows an increased a new level of technology to emerge. But in terms of like that technology trying to control us or being used to control us, I don't think is anything new, if you see what I mean.
Mhm. And in some ways, it's also becoming more invisible. It's not entirely obvious that we're being controlled unless you. It's kind of like a soft power type of way, right?
You could say that.
Nobody. Yeah.
But you could also say that we're just more adjusted to it. And if it's what you live in, right? Like there's that joke, David Foster Wallace joke, where these two young fish are swimming along, and this old fish is swimming the other way, and he passes them, and he goes, "How's the water today, boys?" And the two young fish go, "Yeah," and they swim on past, and then one of them turns to the other one and goes, "What the hell's water?" Right? Like they're living in it, they don't see it. I don't know that it's any more hidden, or if we're just blinder to it.
Well, I think in the precision, part of the precise nature of the technocracy is its ability to kind of work below like that level of visibility. Example, when they give you things like your social credit score and that kind of stuff, that stuff is kind of hidden beneath, right? So by the time you get to the counter, you don't need a person to kind of analyze your stuff and say, "Oh no, yeah, you don't have the correct score to pass through this gate." That's already predetermined long ago.
I suppose. Although I think if you took someone like Orwell and you dropped him in this system, he would see everything in a way that we don't see it.
So exactly, yeah, it's kind of like Orwell's vision versus Huxley's vision. Huxley's vision is a lot less visible.
Yeah,
For
but
Orwell, you have guards standing at each station, right?
But both Orwell and Huxley, I just mean someone of that, someone of 1945, were they to be walk around today, they'd see it, but we don't see it because we're just it's frog boiling, right? Anyway, longue durée. So these trends are. The economic trends are deeper, and they're insofar as that is what is motivating our civilization. That's the instrument of growth. If you remember back to episode 1, the economics are very important for us because it's the way in which our civilization builds and grows itself. So, insofar as Quigley being very focused on economics, it's not that he really cares about economics, it's that he cares about the civilization. And economics is the way to understand our civilization. It might not be the way to understand every civilization. If you go back, you'd really want... this depresses me to say this, but insofar as Quigley's concerned, you need to know about economics for our civilization more than you need to know about Christianity. In terms of the structure and the growth of the last, 600 years of our civilization. For like the Egyptians or the Babylonians, you need to know their religion, because their religion is what motivated their expansion and their growth. If you want to look at that, go and read The Evolution of Civilizations. Quigley doesn't say a lot of this explicitly. I'm kind of guessing. So that's longue durée. As I said, capitalism. We've had these systems of mercantilism, and we have financial capitalism. And what we're looking at today is the death throes of financial capitalism and the emergence of monopoly capitalism in this episode. So it's important to keep those concepts of capitalism in the back of your mind. And the First World War acting as this disruption, again, not making anything new, speeding up processes. That's the thing to remember with the First World War. And yeah, I'll leave it at Today we're going to look at Chapter 7, which deals a lot with inflation. Quigley is not anti-inflation. Quigley says you want some inflation. You want 2 to 3% inflation because inflation keeps things from getting lazy. We're going to think more about this, so I won't say more about that now. Deflation, how deflation is counterproductive. A fairly liberal, classical liberal conception of this. This is sort of the stuff I looked at in economics for my degree.
Is there historical evidence to back this up?
To back what up?
The fact that 2 to 3% is 2 to 3% inflation leads to healthy growth, and zero inflation leads to stagnation.
Yeah, we're gonna ask me that at the end of this episode. Ask me whether you think Quigley's convinced you about that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a fairly...
It's definitely one of those things that sounds correct on paper.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those things that you'll be taught in an economics class in 2023. That deflation is bad, too much inflation is bad, you want a little bit of inflation. The efforts to stabilize prices and stabilize back towards exchange rates, because everybody's very concerned about having their currencies pegged to the gold standard and then to other currencies. They don't like the idea of floating their currencies. The damage that chasing the gold standard does, Britain in particular loses like a decade chasing the gold standard. And they're caught between America and France, which both do a lot better with their gold standard than Britain does.
We have another question in chat, or more of a comment. Blotto says, "I'm loving this series, but I'm waiting for how the conspiracy theories weave into your interpretation, because both Dyer and John Cotto also talk about this book." So it's a question about when are we going to get to the fireworks factory?
It is in there. I kind of think the real value in Quigley is not that he really outlines the conspiracy theories, but he lays this foundation that you can come along and put your conspiracy theories into. He doesn't talk too conspiratorially about the Milner group. They're just this sort of secretive group with some influence that's trying to move things in a certain way. If the real bombshell, I think, is in chapter 17 or 18, when he talks about the American side of these like systems, of these like relationships, networks. The Anglo-American establishment, Quigley doesn't really talk about the Americans that much. It's mainly the Anglos. But then in I think it's chapter 17, he talks about the incredible network and relationship of influence makers, their relationship with the government, their relationship with finance, their relationship with the media, and then their intermarriage, the transatlantic marriages. I don't know who else was it. It was Dyer and somebody else.
Yeah. I just lost 3 live viewers after you said chapter 17.
What I gather that we're doing is we're giving you more of a synopsis of Tragedy and Hope rather than, whereas Dyer, I mean you can what am I doing different to Dyer, Jeff? You're more familiar with it.
Well, Dyer is definitely bringing in different elements, talking about different business magnates or globalists and where they fit into Quigley's account of history.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give a series on what Quigley says. There's some stuff that starts to come in the in chapter 11, changing economic patterns. You start to see something really weird with of all of all companies, Unilever. Now, if you know anything about like big companies, Unilever's out there. It seems like Unilever is sort of a good indicator. I think I don't know. I'm not that worried about bringing in conspiracy theories yet. What I want to do is that's not really what I thought we were doing, to be honest. Anyway, I just wanted to present Quigley because he seems to be referenced a lot, and I just want to give a fairly objective account of what Quigley says.
Fair enough.
And then, we can start. I will start drawing them in when as it comes up. Today, though, is kind of conspiracy theory. I should have said that before the three people left. Because there's something kind of spicy. Chasing the gold standard. And again, it accelerates. It doesn't create. And we can kind of start to see how it sets up the Second World War. And I think this episode we're if you've watched the first four, you can really start to put things together. I said last time you can kind of start to put them together. This time in particular, I think we're really starting to put them together. So, any more comments from the chat before I get going properly?
Oh, I also want to say that I am very interested in this concept of monopoly capitalism, and how it differs from the previous iteration of capitalism. So that's not necessarily conspiratorial, but it is an interesting way of viewing this thing that we call capitalism, because there's often this concept, this idea that all of capitalism is the same thing throughout its history.
Yeah, and Quigley says no. The people that adopt monopoly capitalism earlier do better. I will talk about that. So there's sort of 6 periods to this 50 years, 1897 to 1947. There's reflation, and reflation is the attempt to get back to a previous stable set of prices after deflation, but not going beyond that, because going beyond that would be inflation. Inflation from 1914 to 1925, stabilization after that period of inflation after the First World War, we're sort of returning to it, deflation, reflation again, and inflation. So sort of a little tempo there. So the first bit is this period of reflation from 1897 to 1914. What you have is a process by which gold is being pumped into the economy by Africa and Alaska. There's all these new gold sources of gold, and they come online at a remarkably fortuitous time. They come online after a economic downturn in the late 19th century, and this sort of revitalizes the global economy. After a depression, you tend to have deflation because the people are starting, as the economy recovers, they're starting to increase output again, And so the amount of money on the market is being competed for by more goods. And so prices are going down. Reflation, though, a process of having more gold in the system is going to start to push up prices again by inflation. So that's sort of what's happening in that period. Quigley doesn't talk a lot about this period because it's not really important. It's really more just to set the scene. It's particularly, though, we want to talk about when it goes beyond that into the First World War and the consequences of the First World War. Now, we got a number of reasons why this comes up, why this happens, and the big one you might want to say is introduction of the widespread use of fiat currency. There is this idea with the central bankers that the war could only last 6 to 10 months, because that is roughly how long it would take for the warring powers to use up their gold reserves. The bankers have some sort of belief in their ability to control the system. What they don't realize is this is total war. There isn't a war like the First World War before it, and everybody knows this. And in Britain, right, they don't wait for the gold reserves to disappear and then go on to fiat. Before the First World War starts, as this process of mobilization has picked up pace, the British have already decided to use fiat money before the war even starts. I'm just looking up the date of the First World War. It's Germany declares war on France on August 3rd. Britain declares war on Germany on August 4th. All right, August 4th. 10 days before that, on July 25th, the British decide we're going to use fiat money to fight this war. The war hasn't even broken out yet, and they know they're going to use fiat money. Within 3 days, they're printing fiat money. This is an extremely fast, agile response on the part of British policymakers. You think we can do things fast now? Getting a fiat money operation up and running in 3 days, a week before the First World War breaks out, is pretty amazing, at least to me.
So when was the fiat first issued? Right after they started printing it?
As from what I can tell, yeah. The banks are not happy about this. The banks insist, no, you can't use fiat to pay off. The banks have this desire that fiat will be removed from the system, and that the war debts will not be paid in fiat. And no one respects this, right? You can sort of, one of the things you would say from Quigley's point of view is, you can sort of over-egg the importance of bankers in the conspiratorial talk. The real age of the bankers is gone, and this period is really where the bankers fall from importance. And I think I said this to you a couple of days ago, Jeff. It might have even been the last episode. What do you who's more nefarious, the latest king of the Rothschilds or Klaus Schwab? And Klaus Schwab is a manager; he's not a banker. So Quigley says, we got 4 ways to pay for a war: taxation, fiat money, bank credit, and sales of bonds. Now, what do you get from all those things? Well, taxation, you get no inflation and no debt. Fiat, you get inflation but no debt. Bank credit, you get inflation and debt. And the sales of bonds, you get no inflation but you get debt. And the best way to do this is some combination of the four. But what the First World War does that a lot of these, that no one really knows any better. You can't, it's easy to sit there and go, looking at this period of like, these guys are idiots. They don't really know any better. A lot of our theories about economics are developed off of this period. But one of the things they do is they try to do this resource system based around monetary means. And I said last time, like, they kind of brute force their way. They start to adopt, like, systems of control in order to allocate resources where they need to be. But to an extent, they're still playing this old game of, like, money printing and gold and moving resources and attaching monetary things to monetary values to these things. In the Second World War, it's different. And one of the things Quigley would say is, like, these countries know how to resource manage much better in the Second World War than in the First World War, because they're not trying to do some sort of, like, attached monetary value thing, right? Like, America's not shipping over millions of dollars to the British in the Second World War. They're shipping over tanks and planes, which have a monetary value. The Americans are going to make sure they get their pound of flesh or their ton of flesh out of the British. But they're not really, it's not this game of, like, dollars and cents. It's really like, guns and bombs.
It's like they're actually playing Risk instead of Monopoly.
Yeah. And
I don't know.
and no, that's a good way of putting it. And when you're playing Risk, when you've got an army, you don't care who the richest guy is without an army, because you can have what he has if you want. The non-aggression principle goes out the window once you got a band of bros on horseback able to extort people. So what comes out of we also get this other system of inflation. This is what I just said, and there's a couple of other things that come that produces after the war. So one of the things that happens with inflation in the war is you've got a huge section of industry taken offline that was producing consumer goods that's now producing war goods, which is not the creation of wealth, right? When you make an artillery shell, you're destroying wealth because you're paying for the artillery shell, and it's going to only be used once, and it's going to destroy wealth on the other end when it's successful. And so you've got, as I said last time, there's this, like, inflation that occurs with, like, things like cotton, where all of a sudden you have unions being paid more, and I work in a factory making artillery shells, and I now have more money than I had before, but there's less things for me to buy than before. So inflation happens because there's more money on the market competing for less goods. After the war, though, there's 6 things that happen that keep inflation going into like 1925. You have the end of price fixing, so production's not yet come back onto the market fully, but the governments are no longer really that worried about, like, making sure that a dozen eggs costs whatever it costs. So immediately there's a lot more money competing for prices in a way, and the prices can go where they want. The Allied exchanges between, particularly America, France, and Britain, they're unpegged, so money is now able to go where into undervalued currencies, and overvalued currencies are abandoned. So that pushes up prices in countries that have undervalued currencies. Purchasing power goes up because they don't have to spend it on war anymore. You have an expansion of bank credit due to optimism about, thank God this is over. You've got a budget imbalance where the governments are not able to step straight back into balanced budget because they've got to rebuild and they've got to recover from this disaster, this economic disaster of 4 years. And then you have peacetime production disrupted by revolutions in some countries, Russia, Hungary, or strikes. There's a strikes happen in Britain immediately. Now, there's sort of 3 types of experience that happens in going forward from the First World War to the Great Depression. Sort of half in this period of 1914 to 1925, and half in this period of 1922 to 1930. You've got deflation, moderate inflation, and extreme inflation. And actually, it's a bit more of the previous slide. It's a bit more of this in this time period, in that 1925 period. You have extreme inflation in the East, and what that means is that savings gets wiped out. They don't really have to worry about debt, though, because if you have, if Germany owes however millions or billions of Deutschmark, but the Deutschmark is now where it's practically nothing, they can pay off the debt. The debt's essentially destroyed, so they can recover from it. Now, as you go westwards, you get moderate inflation in France, the Low Countries, and Italy, and they do quite well because they're the best countries to be in. And had Mussolini not done something stupid, Italy would have been up there with them. But France really does pretty good in this interwar period, and they have inflation to the extent that it alleviates their war debt, but it doesn't destroy public confidence in the economic system. Yes, a lot of savings are destroyed, and France is a nation of savers. France is a nation of small companies at the time. It does okay, but people are still not too bitter about this experience. And then as you go west, with America and Britain, you have deflation. America avoids the bad things about deflation for a number of reasons. Partly because while prices are falling, labor costs are falling as well. So things are kind of like on par, staying on balance. And it's really Britain that shoots herself in the foot with deflation. So, and this is the these are the 3 things that happen to achieve stabilization, which is what it says it is, just trying to achieve an economic sort of equilibrium and put an end to chaos. Do we have any questions or things from?
No.
Okay. So, here are the big things that come out of this period. Britain loses her position. She's no longer, from this process, the dominant power in the world, especially in relation to America. What happens is Britain is really oriented around the free market. And what that means is they're fully leveraged in the most economically productive areas of an older world, of an older economy. So they're very committed to ferrous metals and textiles. Now, that's great in 1913. In 1922, 1920, it's a new world, and you need to have new industries. And because of the system that happens in America and Germany, where they're kind of operating, Germany kind of, America definitely, they're operating behind these tariff walls. So they're able to protect their economies. Britain's still really committed to free trade. And they're not able to protect the areas of their economy that they should. And what they should be doing, they're not going to be able to compete with emerging markets able to produce textiles cheaper than they are. But they don't let it go. They commit to it. And what they should be doing is transitioning their economy from these other areas into things like chemicals. That's exactly what Germany does. Germany becomes an incredible chemical innovator in this period. I talked last time about Haber developing the extraction of nitrogen from the atmosphere process, which does a huge amount for Germany. Nitrogen is incredibly important to agriculture. And so Britain lets herself be caught out with her industry and her economy. Her trade fleet declines, while America, Japan, and Holland's trade fleets really expand. Her debt goes up. Meanwhile, America goes from a net debtor owing about $3 billion to a net creditor being owed $4 million. Britain is still a net creditor, but it's declined significantly. What part of this is the bankers' fault? A big part of this, and they are the bankers create their own demise out of this. The British are really committed to staying on the gold standard. Because of this, they don't realize it's not 1913 anymore. And likewise with the way that her industry is out of time. So are the way that the bankers are behaving. One of the things that happens with the bankers in financial capitalism is they really like bonds, and what they do is they start to fund companies based upon the ability to extract debt out of them, and they are selling off. They enjoy this cycle, and if this sounds familiar, there's nothing new under the sun, right? It sounds a lot like 2008, where they enjoy this process of funding companies, extracting wealth from the companies while the companies are working, and when the company collapses, they sell off the assets and enjoy, a net bonus from everything, right? That's what was happening with mortgages. Someone told me once that, before 2008, the banks wanted defaults. They just wanted them at a rate at which they could handle them, because a default meant that, someone has given you rent on that place for a couple of years, and then you get to sell the house at a higher value. And so the banks were not upset about defaults. They were upset about defaults at a very high rate. And the same thing's happening in 1920s with bankers. They're not building railways based off of the idea that the railways are going to be productive. They're funding railways because the idea that we're going to be able to create debt that we can use from these new companies and institutions.
Was there ever a sense from the people in charge that maybe they didn't want to play that game? They didn't want to compete with Germany and the U.S., but they just wanted to keep their economy and kind of
well, I just clicked
for the sake of tradition or something like that.
Yeah, I just clicked this next bullet point, and if you look at this, you can see they're not British. They're bankers. These and Montague Norman is a great example of this. These are guys who do not care about their nation. These bankers are not particularly patriotic. What they want is to preserve sound money, aka the gold standard, above all else. That is the most important thing. And what goes with that is deflation. And as you see, Quigley says controlled inflation would have been better for the British. And this is all presided over by Montague Norman, who's probably in this period up to 1930, the first 30 years of the 20th century, is probably the most important economic figure in the world. He's the head of the Bank of England, and he exerts a lot of control over the economic system. And he's not concerned with what's right for Britain. He's concerned with preserving the value of money, preserving the gold standard. He hates democracy. He which I don't particularly care about, but he hates democracy, and he develops this sort of siege mentality to the point that when they rebuild the Bank of England, when they renovate the Bank of England under his direction, they put the gold deep underground. Why do they put it deep underground? Well, besides it being a safe place, it's made even safer by the fact that there's this little button on Montague Norman's desk. And should the mob ever come and besiege the Bank of England, which Montague Norman thinks is a real possibility, Montague Norman's going to press this button. And what it will do is it will flood the Bank of England vaults with water, because the Bank of England vaults are beneath the water table. So his idea is literally just to flood the vaults so no one can get the money out, to get the gold out, because that would be awful if people got their hands on the gold. Now, it would be awful in that set, in that particular scenario, but Montague is not running the system for the benefit of Britain. He's running the system for the benefit of bankers, people who are savers. That controlled inflation is important because, as I said, France does really well because it's able to reduce the impact that the debt has on its economy. Britain, by pursuing a process of deflation, it preserves savers' money, which is a minority of people, right? It's not like the factory workers. They preserve savers' money, but in so doing, in so protecting the interests of a minority, they also increase the debt, the weight of the debt on the system. So it's not benefiting Britain, the policies that Norman pursues. And this is sort of tied in with that. This process of trying to deflate the value of money, it's really good for the minority, the people who are saving. It's bad for the majority, because what they could have done is they could have fueled the economy by pumping up production, which would have pumped up inflation as well as the output picked up. And that would have been good for British people. They would have had their consumption would have gone up, and it would have been a way to like stabilize everything that did not damage the British. I think Quigley talks more about this in a later chapter where he looks specifically at Britain. And I've said this before a number of times. This really is like a lost decade for the British. It's not until 1932, 33 that Britain really starts to like get back on her feet economically, because she abandons the gold standard in 1931 or 32. As I said in the previous episode, extreme inflation...
Can you talk a little bit also about the repercussions? How did Britain, what are the consequences that they had to pay for falling behind?
Well, it's a close run thing, Britain getting back up on her feet in order to, in time, to see off Germany in the Second World War. She could have been more. Yeah, Quigley is pretty anti appeasement. There's a number of views on appeasement. But the view that's emerging is that appeasement was necessary in order for the British to gain time mobilizing their economy for the Second World War. And what Chamberlain was doing was just trying to get time. The British had standing open orders on all sorts of military test equipment and on all sorts of military equipment in general. And they said to companies, we will buy as many of these as you can produce. And had they been more along, they would have been more, more able to fight the Second World War on better terms. But besides the Second World War, I think it's the beginning of the end of the empire, really. This system. The empire really is not worth it from this point on. It wasn't before, but really, people are starting to go like, what is the point? We're funding all sorts of things in India. We can't, but it's not working here. So, it's a good question. Quigley doesn't really talk much about it in this chapter, and I'm trying to remember what he says in chapter 10. But yeah, I think we'll have more answers in chapter 10. Because it's been a while since I read chapter 10. I'm reviewing these chapters as I prep for the episode, so I haven't looked ahead. But just general decline. I mean, and it does just lose its place, as I said. Like it loses its strength relative to America. It loses its ability to produce.
It has you could say it has a knock-on effect.
Yeah, throughout everything.
Yeah, and especially when you consider what's happening in the other nations that are surpassing Britain.
Yeah.
If it was happening in just a vacuum, it would be a different story. If we just
right.
Considering Britain alone, okay, then yeah, you can keep the gold standard, and you can keep your economy running in that old paradigm. But when you take geopolitics into it, then it's a different story.
Yep. And when we look to the east, we see the the extreme inflation destroys the middle class. I talked about that last time. And the destruction of the middle class is, that's what a disgruntled former middle class is the best recipe for radicalization. And I said, yep, France and low countries with medium inflation do best. So we go into this, excuse me, we go into this period that leads up to the Great Depression and causes the Great Depression, where Britain, from deflating its currency, sort of starts this process by which the Great Depression happens. One of the things that happens in this period is all these manufacturing and efforts and agricultural efforts have been pushed further out and away from Europe. And what that does is it means that all sorts of people now are much more industrialized than they were before in 1913. That means that people that are, as Britain starts to come back online, as France starts to come back online, they have more competitors than they did before because they had to push these things out. So everybody is making stuff and really doesn't want to buy stuff because they're trying to preserve the gold that they have on hand. They don't want to send their gold out there. So they pull the drawbridge, and tariffs start to go up, and what happens is there's less goods to be bought because of this. So deflation starts to happen sort of everywhere. This is a really, I'll be honest, this is a really difficult chapter. So if I'm getting things wrong, you're going to have to forgive me. Because even having reviewed this chapter 3 or 4 times, keeping everything in my head for this one is really difficult to keep up with. The process, and one of the things you can say is, like, this is the sort of an end of an era of globalization. It's also one of the ways that you have these, like, regional blocks starting to form with, like, the Soviets and the Germans, and the deflation starts to sort of occur. So the value of money is going up and the value of goods is going down. Or the value of goods is going down. Sorry. Money is buying more. I've lost track. Okay, whatever. There's this process by which everyone's sort of turning insular, and what France does is it stabilizes its currency and declares the value of its currency at a artificially low rate. So what happens is the French kind of start the economic crisis. Everyone starts to buy up francs because francs are undervalued, but they're fixed, so they're not going to go up in value. So it's a great place to put your money. What happens is the French government, because people are buying francs from the French government at an artificially low rate, the French are going over to London and buying up gold. And this depletes the gold available in London. In response to this, the Federal Reserve starts buying securities and putting money out onto the market. And what people do with that money is they don't spend it, they start speculating. And they create the bubble, which is the Great Depression. What happens out of this is production starts to fall because it's not the uncertainty and the economic infeasibility of producing things as a result of the Great Depression means that it's not worth buying things. And so deflation pushes this process by which, that's right, because the British are not able to really, their currency is overvalued, and so they're not able to properly, that's where the deflation comes in. They're not able to properly keep pace with the French. So this process of deflation in Britain causes this process, and then the French exploit it by undervaluing their currency, and this sort of snowballs into a process where you have the Great Depression, and the production plummets because it's not in anyone's incentive to produce anything, and Britain abandons the gold standard. Now, this is the best thing Britain does in like 15 years of its economics. But the problem is, immediately Britain abandons the gold standard, the value of the pound starts to drop, and people start to buy it. But this gets what you want. Having a low valued currency is not bad, right? It might be bad if you want to go on vacation in a foreign country, but if you're trying to sell stuff, having a low valued currency is really good, because you can sell stuff and get and be paid more for those things that you're producing. So where Britain really needs its currency to really drop in value, the moment it does start to drop in value, people swoop in and start to buy things up. So it's really good, and Britain starts to recover. I think it's 1932 they abandoned the gold standard. 1933 to 1947. This is the last slide. It's a little bit of a shorter one than we did last time, because it was either be a little bit short, although I actually think this is more or less the length they should be, but it's either going to be shorter than the last time or much longer than last time. So this is the last slide.
By the way, there are some gold bros in the chat who want to fight you.
Who's
Would
that?
you like to fight in Diablo 1 or Diablo 2? I know, that's Dark of the Dark.
Okay. I will fight you in Street Fighter. I don't play Diablo or Diablo 2, but I'm willing to fight you in Street Fighter, bro. This isn't me. This is Quigley. I had a note here. It's funny that this came up. This is exactly the note. Weird agreement here between gold bros and old style bankers. Like, if you're a gold bro, if you're a gold bro who thinks that you're like somehow opposing central bankers. Oh, and I didn't even read the best part. We're gonna come back to that in a second. If you're a gold bro who thinks that you're somehow like subverting the system, or like the Rothschilds or those sorts of guys, by wanting gold, no, that's what they wanted. They've just adapted to the modern system.
Yeah, I was going to say that they continually adapt. So that was what they wanted then, but now they're just going to continue to adapt to the next thing every time we kind of. So you're no better than a Rothschild. Step behind.
Yeah, but they're no better than Rothschilds from circa 1920. That's all gold bros are. they're just outdated Rothschilds. I forgot to read this. This is the bit. This is the explosive bit. So all this is happening in the period of 1919 to 1932. And these bankers really want to restore the gold standard. And I'm just gonna I can't do better than Quigley does. So in the effort to concentrated in a determination to restore the gold standard as it had existed in 1914. In addition to these pragmatic goals, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreement arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which we mentioned last time. A private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank in the hands of men like Montague Norman of the Bank of England, Benjamin Strong of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Charles Rist of the Bank of France, and Helmut Schott of the Reichsbank, sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence corporate cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. That is pretty conspiratorial, and it's something that it's one of those things that, like, my mom is not into conspiracy theories. She doesn't believe any of them. She doesn't believe that JFK wasn't shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, which is like the most milquetoast conspiracy theory. And I could point that to I could read that passage out to her, and she could accept it, but she could go like, no, but that's not a conspiracy theory. So it's almost like if you give people enough time, and then tell them like, oh, this happened 100 years ago, they'll go, okay, well, that wasn't a conspiracy theory. It's definitely not happening now. So it's sort of like there's a conspiracy theories age out, if that makes sense. This is as conspiratorial theory as it gets, but if you read that to a lot of normies, they kind of just shrug their shoulders and be like, okay, so what? It's not really a conspiracy theory because it happened in history. But that's as big as it gets. And the Bank of International Settlements still exists, as we talked about last time. And, these guys are trying to control the world. They're not British, they're not French, they're not German. They're bankers, and that's what their allegiance is. Anything on that before I go on? Have I dropped?
No, I'd say keep going. Yeah. No, keep going.
Okay. So 1933 to 39, sort of return to normalcy, reflation. These blocks are starting to appear. The drawbridge has gone up. There are tariffs in place. And what this means is that you're looking to create a system with your neighbors whereby you have everything you need in your local area, and you can produce things without having to buy from this country way over there, that country way over there. So what that looks like is Soviet expansion, the Nazis, the British locking the Commonwealth, the empire down, and creating like zones that operate together. This destroys what is a globalized economy, which is fairly centralized. It was centralized through London. The finance and commerce goes through London. There's 3 centers now. You've got London, Paris, and New York, but they're starting to decline. Quigley says that by the time they create the Bank of International Settlements, it's too late. That this is not like the bankers reaching their ultimate power, but them like responding too late to a system already in decline, because the Bank of International Settlements is this effort to keep everything centralized, because each central bank holds a big amount of its gold in Basel. And when every couple of weeks or whatever, when they need to settle up international trade imbalances, they can just sort of roll bank from the German vault into the French vault, that sort of thing.
So who was happy? Which parties were happy about this breaking up into economic zones, and which parties were not happy about it?
The bankers would not have benefited from it. it would have been politicians and sort of the beginning of the managerial group. I think I do have a bullet point on this. Yeah. In a minute, I will get to that.
Oh,
One of the things, so one of the ways that they stabilize their economies is via arms manufacturing, because it doesn't. You've got production that is not based upon the market. It's sort of the beginning of command economy, and you have governments using taxes and debt to keep big portions of the economy going, building up weapons stockpiles, which are ultimately going to be used for destruction. So a lot of people have weapons on hand by 1939. And as I said, the British are doing this, but they're just behind the ball. Germany is the most industrial efficient country in Europe, and it's the second most efficient in the world, behind America. So you get this, and this with the pulling up of the drawbridges and an increase in arms manufacturing and this desire for autarky. You get the blocks starting to form. You get these groups starting to form, and the only country that doesn't really get it is America. The only country that really wants to keep going with the free market is America. Not because America's virtuous, but because America is so far removed from any threat that it's like, yeah, we'll keep going. And we benefited so much from the First World War that they just don't care. So they're like, we're going to keep going. One of the things Quigley says is what happens now is markets being run not for economic interests but for political interests, and that's what Hitler's doing. It's what Mussolini's doing. It's what Stalin's doing. All these guys are doing it for political interests. The French are doing it, and they're not bothered about free markets. And then you have another period of inflation.
I think that's kind of a point that libertarians need to consider, which is, yes, the free market is nice for businessmen. If you want to start a business, you want to, be in control of your own finances. There's also something to be said about living in a strong, militarily powerful polity, right?
I know
that also has advantages to your lifestyle and to your business ventures as well. So
yeah, why? I referenced this last time. If you haven't watched it, is it Princes of the Yen or Masters of the Yen?
Princes, yeah.
Japan has this protected wartime economy that continues on into the post-war. They're oriented around production, and they do really well for themselves up until the moment the World Bank steps in, or the IMF steps in, or international finance steps in, and makes them stop. The Trump seems to have done quite a lot for America by being protectionist. I remember it. The idea of protectionism was heresy to me. But it seems like what you need a certain amount of protectionism. It keeps things. It can help keep your economy stable and balanced. Britain.
That point just came up in chat as well. Hello says, there's something to be said about being able to plan a business based on the stability of the value of the value the money holds. You cannot plan a business currently beyond a mere couple months max.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about stability in general, I think.
Yeah. Well, stability is everything. I don't care about freedom. I care about stability. Um, and freedom is only the ability to consider freedom only comes after you live in a stable system. Um, when the Mongols are riding down on you, you can't say like, "This is a violation of my property rights." You better either surrender and hope that they're going to be merciful, or you better kill as many as possible to slow them down before they roll on. Um, and I because Britain's a great example of this. It's a great example of it in 1919, where um, it's very leveraged into textiles and ferrous metals, and it's not able to protect areas of its economy and allow them to grow. And it's a great example today. Britain is the most service-based economy in the world. There might be like a minor economy like Luxembourg or something, which is more, but like Britain is incredibly leveraged into services. We don't make anything anymore. We've let everything get funneled away. I don't know about you guys, and it's not just because I don't like them to begin with, but I hate calling up like my bank and having to talk to an Indian. Now, even the services that like I actually come into contact with, they're not even British. They're like these weird like consulting firms that are huge. And I'd much rather have a protectionist Britain that makes shit. I know if you're a blue collar guy and you don't support Trump, I don't know why you don't support Trump. I'm not saying Trump's good, but Trump walked into the big three auto manufacturers in Detroit and he said, "If you start making cars in Mexico, I'm going to drop such a tariff on you, you'll never sell another car in this country again." And it's in a thought experiment where nations are really just like these providers of certain cultural things and certain legal things, and they never go to war with one another, and they never and they just have totally open economies. Fine, I guess the free market works, and it won't matter, and you have like full employment. But that's not what the world is, right? Like the world is the system of realpolitik, where when you see the opportunity to grab some more power for you, at least nations will take that chance. And the system of the free market breaks down in situations like that, and Britain gets left out to dry in those things. And especially if you're the last one to stop playing by the rules. You're also really disadvantaged from doing that. The first one to give up on the game wins, sort of. They're in the strongest position, and America's so removed from it that it doesn't care. But they've also got huge tariffs. Anyway, so 1939 to 1947, we've got more inflation, but it's similar to other periods of inflation, but it's handled much better, where you don't get out of control inflation. It's managed much better, and they realize they don't have to do this thing around the gold standard. And they're very comfortable with fiat. They're managing their economies not based upon this notion of like gold in the bank. They're just like, we don't care. This is a total war. This is an existential thing. Having gold in the bank is only something you can worry about again, like when there's order. So that happens. Part of this is Lend-Lease, which we will talk more about later. The most hostile action a friendly government has ever taken is the way the Americans structured Lend-Lease for the British. They raped Britain. They said, you have to sell everything before we start to give you loans. And the British got rid of a huge amount of their capital and a huge amount of their gold. That's never been a condition to any sort of international loan, that you have to do this sort of stuff. That's happening as well. And I will talk more about the absolute hostility that America represents. No, you know. Anyway, yeah. So that's it. That's the economic system in this period. I think you can start to kind of put things together. What comes out of this is the bankers die off as a real force in the way that Quigley's talking about. The monopolies really take over in this period. The big companies that are able to survive take over. There's a decline in the little guys. You get things like Unilever emerging, and that will be in an episode or two that will really look at the rise of the monopoly capitalism. But this is what sets up the death of financial capitalism and sets up the beginning of monopoly capitalism, because that, especially in that area of arms manufacturing, it's a great way of, you when you're building arms, you want standardized equipment. So you're very happy for there to be, even in the most free market economies, you're very happy for there to be monopolies in your arms industry. The bankers get significantly, their prestige and their influence gets significantly wiped out by the Great Depression. This view of them not caring about really the productivity of the things that they're producing, but kind of farming them for bonds, falls apart. So it's a big chapter. If you're gonna read Quigley, I would say this is one of the. If you don't want to read all of Quigley, I would say this is one of the chapters to read. Yeah.
You mean this one or the next one?
This one that we've just been talking about, chapter 7. Especially if you're into economics. If you're a gold bro, I'd read chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 11, and I can't think about any of the post-World War chapters at the moment. They're beyond my recollection. But yeah, and I would also think about what's his face, managerialism guy, Jeff Burnham.
Burnham.
Yeah, if you haven't read Burnham, it'd be interesting to read. I haven't read Burnham. Really, I've read about a third of Managerial Revolution, but Burnham's ideas really start to pick up here from here on.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think we kind of mistitled today's stream. It should have been called "The Death of the Gold Standard."
Can you rename it?
Or something like that, right? Yeah, I will. Questions. Do you want to kind of give a little bit of a tease about what the deal is with Unilever?
It's a merger between a British and Dutch companies. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember much. I just remember when I read it, I was like, what the hell? It's still like 100 pages in the future from what we've just done. it's paradigmatic of monopoly capitalism. I remember reading it and being like, this is managerialism, monopoly capitalism, and like technocratic stuff wrapped up into one company. It's just a great like example of it. I can't remember more than that at the moment. I'm just seeing if I can like search it on a PDF. And if something might jog my memory.
I guess there is something to be said about this phenomenon of the corporate merger. It's like sometimes it even seems like seemingly unrelated companies end up becoming mergers, and then it's like, oh, you see, there's these like overlaps suddenly that you see that are pretty obvious where their interests line up.
That's because, as I said in previous episodes, what you have is like bankers putting together conglomerates that it really tells you more about which banker is behind them than really any interests on their part, and the bank is sort of constructing conglomerates, which they then lose control of.
In chat, we were just talking about Unilever, and Dark of the Dark was saying, kind of maybe facetiously, the vegetable oil company, question mark.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, and then I threw back a question, and why do you think all of your food is cooked in veggie oil? He says, because in the 1960s, there was an alarmist study published, and Ansel Keys that saturated fat caused heart disease. And then I asked, was that study funded by Unilever? And then, surprisingly, it seems like, Harvard, who published that study, does get mad donations from Unilever.
Yeah. So let me read this out to you. While monopolistic organization of economic life reached its peak in Germany, the differences in this respect between Germany and other countries have been overemphasized. It was a difference of degree only, and even in degree, Britain, Japan, and a number of smaller countries were not so far behind the German development as one might believe at first glance. The error arose from two causes. On the one hand, German cartels and monopolies were well publicized, while similar organizations in other countries remained in hiding. As the British Committee on Trusts reported in 1929, quote, "What is notable among British consolidations and associations is not their rarity or weakness so much as their unobtrusiveness. It is possible that the British vegetable oil monopoly around Unilever was as powerful as the German chemical monopoly around IG Farben. But while much has been heard about the latter, very little is heard about the former. After an effort to study the former, Fortune magazine wrote, quote, no other industry is perhaps quite so exasperatingly secretive as the soap and shortening industries." That's what made me go like, what is what's going on with Unilever? They're a monopoly that's incredibly secretive. And I think at the time I was like super on board with, like, I still am, but I was just sort of waking up to seed oils, and I was just like, oh. Yeah, the former, and if you go back a little bit, from this date onward, financial capitalism grew rapidly in Britain without ever achieving the heights it did in the United States or Germany. Domestic concerns remained small, owner-managed, and relatively unprogressive, especially in the older lines like textiles, iron, coal, shipbuilding. One chief field of exploitation for British financial capitalism continued to be in foreign countries until the crash of 1931. Only after 1920 did it tentatively spread into newer fields like machinery, electrical goods, and chemicals. And in these, it was superseded almost at once by monopoly capitalism. In addition, its rule was made relatively honest, in contrast to the United States, but similar to Germany. It made little use of holding companies, exercising its influence by interlocking directorates and direct financial controls. It died relatively easily, yielding control of the economic system to the new organizations of monopoly capitalism, constructed by men like William H. Lever, Viscount Leverhulme, or Alfred M. Mond, Lord Melchett. The former created a great international monopoly in vegetable oils centering around Unilever, while the latter created the British chemical monopoly known as Imperial Chemical Industries. So, there's like 3 or 4 chapters. There's 3 chapters that really deal with like this transition from financial capitalism to monopoly capitalism, and they're not like 1, 2, 3. They're not sequential. They're kind of spread throughout the first half of the book, and we get the final piece of this picture of finance and economics in chapter 11, which talks about Unilever. But one of the things Quigley says is the country that really, in the Second World War particularly, manages itself the best in terms of like efficiency is Britain. And a big part of that is like the willingness to turn to monopoly capitalism. Germany, Quigley says Germany, it's only like 1943 or 1944 that the German war economy really starts to kick up. It's operating at like 30 to 35% of its economy devoted to the war, even up until 1943. From day one, the British are like 45%, and they're trying to get to 50%. America, it never gets beyond 40%. But like day one, the British are like going as hard as they can because they know what's at stake. If they don't win this, they're like everything's gone for them. So they really kick up monopoly capitalism, and it's them more than any other that really develop managerialism via things like Unilever, because it's there's this field that emerges in the Second World War called I think it's operations research, and it's initially done around like how do you spread out anti-aircraft batteries around your capital city and in the most efficient way possible. We can't shoot down 100%, but like where can we shoot down 70%? What very cold things like what neighborhoods do we allow to be bombed because they have low value to us? What is the value of putting one anti-aircraft battery here as opposed to 3? Is there some sort of synergistic effect from having 3 batteries operating together instead of one alone? And that is managerialism, and it comes out of the mindset of monopoly capitalism, which is all about like leveraging efficiencies for the greatest return. Monopoly capitalism might not be good at delivering. Monopolies might not be good at delivering services to you at efficient prices, but they're still very interested and run by managers who are trying to make the system work for them. And that operations research comes out of it. And Unilever, as this very secretive monopoly, is quite significant. Now, I think I'm really pushing this, and this isn't from Quigley. This is research I did at the time. I believe there's some sort of occultic link with Unilever. And I will have more on that when we get to Unilever.
Well, as there should be with all chemical companies, I guess.
Yeah.
One final question here from Blotto. He's heard that Tragedy and Hope has been edited from the original. Any truth to that?
I don't know. I don't know about that one. That's a good question. I have the one that's called the New Millennium Edition, unabridged. So I can't speak to it, but I'll have a look and I'll be for next time, I'll if I found anything, I'll say. My thought is, I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe. I don't know. What people. One of the guys on the Council of Foreign Relations who said once Quigley was dead, he was like, Quigley wasn't a part of us. He never was a part of us. If Quigley was like this fanboy, that's what this guy basically says. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. I think he got things wrong. I don't know that anyone was really bothered about what he said, but I'll have a look. It's a good question. Yeah. So next time, next episode, we're going to look at the authoritarian powers, the Soviets, and of course Germany, and maybe Britain. That might be too long to do Britain as well, but we'll look at at least Russia and Germany. So that's that.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for watching.
Cool. See you guys later.